Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and join the notification squad to stay in the loop for more creepy content. My name is Jason, I work in a local clothing store. We basically sell stuff that people think is really fancy. But it's basically the same stuff, you can find it in a clothing store, even places like Walmart to Goodwill. Sometimes. I've had this job for about 2 years now. And while it isn't the greatest, a job is a job, I get to earn enough money to be able to have some independence from my parents, which is really nice. The story took place in the winter of last year. It was a good while after Christmas, but I don't remember exactly when it happened. I just remember there being snow on the ground the next morning after it all went down. So I work pretty usual hours for a college student. I know I'm technically a full-time student, but it doesn't feel like I have a whole lot of classes. Maybe I picked an easy major, maybe I'm a genius, who knows. But I don't really study, and I barely do the homework, and I still manage to get pretty good grades. I remember there being a very strange-looking man that started coming into the store. He didn't seem like the usual kind of customer that we would get. Most of the people that shop at the store are at least upper middle class. I don't mean to say that they were rich or anything. But if you had enough money to buy expensive clothes, I'm talking like $50 for a t-shirt, then you're probably doing pretty well for yourself. But not this guy. This guy looked like he was 2 steps away from being homeless. He had this really pale hair, most of it was covered under a dingy black hat that he wore on his head. And you can only see this white hair as it stuck out from a few places from under the hat. He was an older guy, but not too old, probably 50 years old or something like that. But judging by how much of a weirdo he was, I guess I can't really be all that sure. He started coming in every single day. And he always bought something. It was not always something big. Sometimes it was a $70 pair of pants. Other time it was a really expensive watch. However, with as much stuff as he bought, he'd never seemed to wear any of it though. At least not from any of the times I'd ever seen him. He always dressed in a baggy sweatshirt or really old worn-out overalls with a denim jacket on top. And the denim jacket had cuts and holes, and it looked really weird because his overalls would be denim too. I don't know if he thought it went well as an outfit. But I wasn't about to tell this guy he dressed stupidly. After all, I did get a commission for everything that was sold in the store. However much of a creep he may have been, I will gladly welcome his business. I know the really weird thing I noticed about him was that he never actually tried on the clothes that he was buying. Like ever. He would spend 40 minutes analyzing a pair of pants, hold it in front of himself in the mirror, feel the texture, and try to look at it from different points of view. But he would never actually go into the dressing room and try them on. I thought that was the weirdest thing of all. I also remember the couple of times he wouldn't buy the item that he had been looking at. And there would always be this really musky smell to them. I know this may sound weird, but sad of morbid curiosity. I would smell clothes after people try them on after the store had closed. I can't really smell much otherwise, like, I'd seen this guy at least 20 different times and I never got a smell of him. But whenever I smelled those clothes that he had been looking at, I could smell some strange combination of body odor and smoke. I got really curious about what he does when he isn't randomly buying clothes, and an expensive and overpriced store like this one. There was also this one time that he came into the store and specifically asked for me. I thought that was pretty weird, considering that he had never really struck up a conversation with me or anything. Of all the times that I had interacted with him, it was always on a very formal basis. And we both said the very bare minimum necessary. It was obvious that he didn't like coming to the store. And I found myself drawing a blank, coming up with reasons as to why he kept on doing it. I didn't think too much of it though. I was a college student. And anything outside of chilling with my friends and getting my assignments done didn't really matter at all that much to me. I remember this one night that I was doing laundry. I normally hate doing laundry, as you might imagine, but I specifically remember putting my clothes into the washing machine. I got a whiff of one of my sweatshirts that I thought smelled really weird. I smelled my sweatshirt again, and it reminded me of the smell of the clothes from this one freaky guy at my job. Well, the next day I was working my shift as usual, and here came in same old dude. This time he was checking out a pair of shoes literally up have Crocs. I didn't even understand why we had Crocs at the store in the first place. They were exactly the same as the ones you can get at Walmart, except for the fact that we charged $60 for them instead of $15. Well, this guy spent about 45 minutes looking at this pair of crafts before he decided it was time to head out. He came up to my register and took an unusually long period of time to pay for his Crocs. And it was while he was reaching for his wallets, in pain, that I remembered something. I totally forgot that I don't wear my sweatshirt at work. It's against the rules, you have to dress kind of nice, which normally meant a polo shirt or a decent dress shirt. Something you could throw a vest over and look like a halfway decently dressed representative of a fashion store. It got me on this whole train of thought that made me realize that my sweatshirt didn't smell that way. Because I was spending too much time with this weird guy. He must have somehow gotten a hold of my sweatshirt on his own accord. I remember my heart fall into the pit of my stomach. When I made the realization, I felt myself turn red and started to sweat. However, freaked out as I became, he took no notice, just kept paying for his goofy pair of green Crocs. If he would ever smelled the smell, he would understand just how distinct it really was. I mean, there was nothing in the world like it. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized there was a good possibility that the sky was creeping on me somehow, maybe even getting into my house. I quit my job that day on the spot. I didn't want to put myself in jeopardy for a goofy retail job, especially because that guy showed no sign of ever slowing down. He was there every single day I worked. A couple of weeks after the incident, I asked some of my former co-workers if he was still showing up on a regular basis. They told me they didn't remember exactly when, but he stopped coming in right around the time I stopped working there. This only made me more paranoid about the whole situation. I've developed a couple of possible theories as to what exactly was going on with this guy. But none of them really make any sense. I've tried telling a couple of my family members about it, but they all think I'm trolling them. To this day, I still haven't figured out exactly what happened. And I'm honestly kind of worried that I never will know what this creepy guy at the retail store was doing there every day. Or why he stopped going after I quit. The worst experience of my life happened on June 20th, 2019. I was working at a local store. That's kind of a chain in this region of America, and I don't want to give out the name because it will make it obvious who I am. This story did get some media coverage. And as much as I want to share my story with the world in an honest way, I also want to remain as anonymous as possible. I don't want the rest of my life to forever be associated with this event. But this is how it went. My family's been struggling since 2015. My grandma got cancer, and we did our best to put her through chemotherapy. It didn't work out, and she tragically passed away that year. For some kind of legal reason, the financial burden of my grandmother's chemotherapy fell on my father. It just put a serious economic strain on him. I mean, could you imagine someone wants you to pay over $100,000 for medical treatment that didn't even save your family member? I don't understand why the system does this to people. But I'll keep politics out of this. It didn't ruin our family. But it did mean that our middle-class lifestyle was now going to be extremely difficult to maintain. There was a lot less food in the house, we weren't able to go on vacation anymore, and making ends meet was generally a struggle. I remember my parents having a lot of fights over money, and I think it put a real strain on our relationship. While I was in high school at the time, and I did my best not to notice. It's tough being a high school girl and not being able to afford nice clothes or makeup, especially when you were not born naturally beautiful. I remember some of the wealthier popular girls making fun of me for dressing like a bag lady. But sometimes a sweatshirt was the only thing that I had without any holes. I was an only child. So thankfully, I was the only person that had to suffer along with my parents. High school went by, and don't get me wrong. It wasn't pleasant. But I got through it. And my family survived on too. As time went on, we just found ways to cope without having money. I knew that I was going to have to start getting a part-time job in school, which I was honestly kind of looking forward to. My parents told me that they would let me use my money on whatever I wanted, which I had been looking forward to for months. And that's what I got, an after-school job at this local chain store. It's kind of hard to explain. It's a weird combination of a deli, a gas station, and a convenience store, all nicely wrapped into one, with a very strange name that is almost notorious in this region. While I was enjoying my time, especially because this was the summer between junior and senior year of high school, I was excited to graduate because I had really good grades, and I was already receiving scholarship opportunities, some of them full rise to very nice colleges in my state. My parents were really proud of me. And as hard as I had been, we were ultimately a happy family at the end of the day. So I pretty much worked as much as I could over the summer. I was still kind of a loner by this point. And I wanted to turn as much my time into money as possible. So it didn't really matter if I spent 80 hours a week working, because I didn't really have that much to do outside of work, especially with school being out for the summer. I remember there being a particular night that my manager asked me to work a little bit over. I normally started my shift at 6 a.m. and went home at 4 p.m. This was a pretty nice schedule, honestly. And work was easy enough that I really didn't mind share during the rush hours. It could get a little hectic. But all the time in between was pretty chill. Well, my manager wanted me to stay until 10 p.m. that night. That was a lot later than I was used to. And I wouldn't have said yes, but I wasn't working the next day. So I figured, why not? I also got double time for working, which made it even better. You see, the way this place works is that after 8 p.m., most of the bakery closes down, and there are a lot less people on site. Normally, this time from 8 and well into the night, it's normally just enough people to run the register and get people to pay for gas. Normally means about 2 people working at a time. Me and this one guy I really didn't care for had to work this together. His name was Jeremy. He gave me really weird vibes and had made inappropriate comments. He wasn't dirty or perverted or anything, but he was just extremely offensive and never held back a nasty insult whenever he felt like throwing money at you. Me and him had a couple of instances where we argued, but by this point, we both knew where we stood. We didn't like each other. But both of us wanted to do our job and get paid without too much of a hassle. So we were at least in a functional working relationship for the sake of our jobs. This was a weekday night, and it just happened to be particularly slow. I never really worked their later shifts, so I had no idea what to really expect. And then my memory goes blank. 4 hours. I had no idea what had happened. I just remember waking up in the middle of the store and getting up and feeling really sick. I was dizzy and confused, and it took me a few minutes to realize where I was or what had happened. I remembered as I walked across the tiled floor, I heard a deep crunching noise beneath my feet. I didn't look down. I was too dazed, but I assumed that they were M&Ms or some kind of candy. After walking outside, I gotten even more confused than I already was. I went back inside and saw blood. I looked down on my shoes and noticed that I was covered in a thick dark red liquid. I started hyperventilating, called 911, they were there within minutes. I was rushed to the hospital. And that it was only a couple of days after explaining everything to the police that I pieced together what had happened. When I was at the hospital, that he found drugs in my system. This surprised me because I didn't even smoke cigarettes. The drugs they found in my system were likely the kind that you find in rupees or whatever. And the police had a theory that it went something like this. Jeremy was a mentally unstable individual. He decided that he wanted to end his own life. He was kind of obsessed with becoming infamous, even ran a whole bunch of social media accounts where he was desperately attempting to become a celebrity. Well, he figured the only way he was ever going to become truly famous was if he committed some kind of horrible crime in some terrible fashion that shocked the world. And he decided that it was going to be that night with me there. The police believed that, as crazy as he may have been, he wasn't a fundamentally violent person. So he couldn't bring himself to hurt me or anything else like that. But he did have a plan. He slipped a roofie or some kind of drug into my monster that I'd been drinking during that shift. After I passed out, he shot himself in the head staring at the security camera. Even set up his smartphone on a tripod to capture it and hope that it will be used as footage on the news. I'm pretty sure they did actually use it. And when I had woken up the country stuff on the floor or fragments, it was a skull. This all had been really traumatic and I don't know what to do anymore. I quit my job. And I've just been hanging out at my house over the summer waiting for school to start back up, kind of staring into space. My parents had been really understanding, but they have no idea how to help me. Despite our bad financial situation, they scraped together enough money to send me to therapy. I haven't had a whole lot of time to recover from this whole situation. But I do feel like I've made some progress. Some days, I feel extremely apathetic. There's a big part of me that doesn't know what to do with my life. Now, I feel so different after having gone through this experience, especially because I still get contacted by the occasional journalist. One do another story on this. But I think this will be the final and last time that I have to relive this. This is a somewhat horrifying, but also hilarious story that happened to my best friend. Me and him were sports players together when we were younger, and I've always been close ever since. His name is Brian, and we were about 20 years old when the story happened. He had just gotten a job at GameStop. He was really excited about being able to get discounts on games, and to even be able to play games a few days early, in some cases with the new releases. Me and him both love playing video games together. And it was probably a dream job in a lot of ways. Now, my friend, Brian is a great guy. But he isn't the sharpest knife in the drawer, if you catch my drift, on the football field, or the basketball field, or even in Call of Duty. He's probably the best. But when it came to reading a book or passing the test, well, let's just say that he would be on the bench if he could for all that kind of stuff. Things started out one day when we both decided that we wanted to start playing horror games. I had watched a Let's Play of Resident Evil. I thought it would be a really fun idea. He wasn't a big fan of horror, but he was willing to play whatever games we could get, especially because he got such a nice employee discount at GameStop. We had spent one Friday night playing Resident Evil until 4 o'clock in the morning. I didn't even have anywhere to be the next day, and he wasn't working until 12. So we figured that there was no harm, no foul. Now, before I go any further, I would just like to say that your brain is like a sponge. You absorb information and stimuli and process it in various ways. Sometimes your brain can process information in a way that you might not expect it to do. Sometimes things can really stick with you. They can really play a role in your psyche. And I think Resident Evil did that for my friend Brian. So he worked that shift the next day. And when I talked to him that night, when he got up for work, he started telling me that he thought someone had been murdered at GameStop. Again, not the sharpest knife in the drawer. I started asking him more about the details. And the only evidence that he found was some random pile of blood that was located out of the store on the side of the building where most people usually don't go. He started telling me that he thought his manager had murdered someone. I jokingly told him that we shouldn't play Resident Evil anymore. We decided for a different game that night, and I didn't ask him to play Resident Evil again. And he never asked me to do so either. So whatever psychological change happened to my friend, it took place over the course of playing Resident Evil one time for a couple of hours. Weeks literally went by, and he was still talking about the pile of blood that he saw outside of GameStop. It would only happen on random occasions. According to him. I tried telling him that there must have been some kind of explanation for it. Maybe someone was dumping sauce or something from the nearby stores. There was a pizza place in the same strip mall. He didn't buy it though. He was thoroughly convinced that someone had been murdered and the murderer was draining out a small amount of blood, and then putting it in this one spot outside of GameStop. He sounded really serious when he talked about it, and he never called the police or anything. He told me he asked his manager once about it, and his manager told him not to worry about it. It just didn't seem like that big of a deal. But I remember this one time we had been playing Call of Duty for about 3 hours one night. He started to talk about in detail and how much it freaked him out. He told me that he was having nightmares regularly and that he didn't like working at that GameStop anymore. I tried telling them that this wasn't a big situation and that he was just being wildly paranoid, but he wouldn't listen to me. It wasn't very long before he decided to quit that job at GameStop. It was really sad because he no longer got any of the perks of being an employee. This also meant that I didn't get to have the perks of being a friend of an employee, which also sucked. But Brian was very insistent that something was going on there. And he didn't want to end up getting murdered for knowing too much of some kind of criminal activity. A couple of days later, my curiosity got the better of me, and I just had to know where this pile of blood was coming from. It turned out that one of the other GameStop employees had been someone I went to high school with, and I messaged them on Facebook. I asked them about this mysterious pile of blood and everything. And then he told me this. The truck driver who occasionally delivers the games and merchandise to this GameStop had a truck that isn't the greatest. It isn't that large or anything, and it's the same one that always makes deliveries to the specific GameStop. For some kind of logistical reason, the truck gets a certain amount of rest. For some reason, the truck driver cleans the truck off in this one particular spot every time he delivers there. When I found that out, I laughed uncontrollably for about 1 hour. Brian literally found a pile of rust and thought it was blood. As much as I love that guy like a brother and respect him as a person, things like this is why I have such a hard time taking them seriously. I only just messaged this guy on Facebook a day ago, and I haven't spoken to Brian since he works at a restaurant now. And it's been really busy there. I'm not sure if I should even tell him though. A part of me really wants to tell him and make fun of him. But I don't want to hurt his feelings too bad. I might low-key send him a link to a video about rust and see if he connects the dots. And that's the story about my friend Brian, who wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer, and how he was convinced that people were being murdered and their blood was being dumped outside of GameStop. But it was actually just a pile of rust. This story didn't actually happen to me. It happened to my uncle. He works a local Walmart's in our small town and actually has a pretty solid thing going on over there. I know Walmart might not seem like the best place to work, but they actually pay their staff pretty well. Thanks considered. He's been working there for about 10 years now. And I think he's the assistant manager or something like that. I do know that he has seen a lot of weird stuff during his time working at Walmart. Everyone knows about how weird the general public can be, especially at places like Walmart. He's told me a couple of stories that I thought were either really funny or downright creepy. But I think this one has to top them all. Because ever since I heard it, I haven't gone back to this Walmart. I don't want to after knowing this. What do I do when I have to buy stuff from Walmart? I drive to the one in the next town over. And I'm not even kidding. He could literally ask anyone that knows me. I actually do it. I know my uncle wasn't trying to scare me when he told me, but I can't unsee this entire event taking place. And I'm pretty sure the only reason he actually told me in the first place is because he thought I was into horror stories or whatever. Maybe I was before this entire thing, but not really anymore. So we started off by telling me that he was trying to climb the corporate ladder at Walmart. He wants to eventually become the manager for this local store in due time. But that means putting in more work and more effort than everyone else for a very long time and hoping that your energy is rewarded. One of the things he regularly had to sacrifice was a normal sleep schedule. Then we'll force you to work night shift. But one of the best ways to climb that corporate ladder, at least at a local store, was to volunteer for the night shift. I think he made a few dollars more an hour, but it was never worth it. You can't really have a life outside of work when you work from sundown to sunup. This story took place on one of those night shifts a couple of years back. It was a warm summer night, humid as you could imagine. And as you might imagine, there isn't much going on at Walmart late at night. The only reason that's even open is because if it wasn't, there wouldn't be any other stores in our town open at that time. He was the senior most person on site that night. So if something went wrong, it was his responsibility. And if he couldn't handle it, he would have to call the store manager, which is never a good idea if you want to be on their good side. Well, one of the other workers had just brought in a few shopping carts, but they noticed something weird in the parking lot. There were 7 or 8 vehicles parked on the far side of the parking lot, and it looks like people were doing something. This other worker never specified what that was, but they were concerned enough that they asked my uncle to look into it, and so he did. I remember him telling me that it was really unusual to have people there. It's such a late time. He said it had to have been anywhere from 3:30 or 5 in the morning. He stepped outside and looked over. They were definitely a couple of people doing something over there. But he couldn't make it out from the store entrance. I started walking toward the crowd of people, and all of a sudden, they all started their cars at the same time. It was like they were waiting for someone to come out and confront them or something. Now, he was out in the middle of this parking lot, and all of those cars started driving toward him. And it wasn't like a casual drive either. He said they must have Florida going straight for him. At least a few cars too, so he couldn't jump anywhere. He said that he braced himself for impact and closed his eyes. A few seconds went by before he noticed that the cars had stopped on a dime in front of him. He had no idea what to do at that point. He was just standing there looking into the dark tinted windows of these mysterious cars in the Walmart parking lot being driven by who the heck knows who. He said that it was at this point that one of them rolled down the window and threw something at him. It hit him on his leg, and he was trying to determine whether or not he wanted to run back to the store or try to fight for his life. He was really expecting them all to get out of the car to attack him. Thankfully, that attack never came. He stood there for another few seconds before they all sped off into the night. When he looked down to analyze the object that they had thrown at him, he was mortified. It was actually a decapitated head. And even worse, they had no skin. You just have to imagine the way a human head looks without any skin. He threw up and fell to the floor. I'm sure it was in complete shock. He picked up his Walmart radio and screamed for help. And wasn't very long before he ran back into the store and phoned the police. He spent a lot of time trying to remember license plates and what the vehicles look like. Unfortunately, I don't think it helped the police very much. I'm pretty sure the case is still unsolved to this day. But wait, it gets even scarier than that. Walmart, as you might imagine, has security cameras at the store and in their parking lot. Everyone was sure that the security camera footage would reveal exactly what had happened that night. But it didn't. The entire ordeal happened just out of frame. And this led the police to believe that whoever had done this had very intricate knowledge of Walmart security cameras. Of course, the implication there is that whoever had done this was someone who works or had previously worked at this local Walmart. And it's not like everyone uses the security cameras all the time. So that narrows down the number of potential suspects even further. But it never turned up anything meaningful. The zippered head was the weirdest part. Apparently, it was male, but its teeth were removed. And I heard DNA analysis with further forensics was unable to pull up any identity for around here, or any missing person reports. Last I heard is that they were working with authorities across the border to cross-reference in the information. Apparently, every single person had a solid alibi with proof. And what makes the entire situation even weirder is the fact that it just seems like such a random crime to commit. I mean, what did they actually accomplish here? It just seems like a lot of planning and effort to do something really stupid. But I'll never understand gang activity, you're really who was involved. After this, since then, rumors spread across town and everyone became a little anxious about going to this Walmart. I'm not the only one that feels this way. For a small border community like ours, something like this happening is a little unthinkable. It really changes the way you view your neighbors and the people that live in your area. Who would do this? And we don't know who, you just feel more anxious and suspicious of anyone that you meet. My family has told me that seems like there are less people who go to local events like parades and such anymore after this incident. And I can't blame them. That was my uncle's horrifying Walmart story that I still regularly think about. The reason I don't ever go to our local Walmart and probably never will ever again. I've been working in a clothing store in the mall for about 5 weeks. I was your typical high school graduate who wasn't sure if they wanted to go to college or not. I was just kind of working because I didn't really have anything else to do. A little background on me. I'm a pretty large guy. I'm 6 feet tall. And I'm not some kind of gym freak. But I do consider myself more fit than most. I probably work out 3 or 4 times a week. And this has honestly been really cool, kind of being seen as the tough guy, I suppose. The day this happened, there were a lot more people than usual. I remember there being customers everywhere. And it just felt like there was no ending the day. I remember me and my co-workers rushing around and having this feeling of, wow, we don't have enough staff for this. It eventually slowed down as the day came to an end. And it was always nice because she kind of get a cool down. That is if you work the entire day like I do. This happened during that slow when it was somewhere between the late afternoon and night, probably had to have been about 6 or 7. The sun was still out, seeing as was still summertime. A man who was even taller than I was walked into the store. And from the second he stepped foot on the premises, I knew that he had bad intentions. His body language was sending out a lot of freaky signals. And I started getting ready for some kind of confrontation. As much as I hated these kinds of things, I knew that everyone was going to look at me to save the day, considering most of my other co-workers were female, and the only other guy was kind of small. The ominous man that had walked into the store was wearing a black sweatshirt and a dark pair of jeans. I at least remember that much. He walked over one of the clothing racks and literally threw it to the floor. Everyone in the store turned and looked at him, and he just kind of stood there for a second. I yelled and started walking over to him, and I saw him reach into his pocket. I'm not sure what kind of pistol he pulled out. I just remember him firing at me multiple times. I looked out and was only hit once in the arm. At least at first, I managed to get behind the register area to take cover. For some reason, he believed that he could fire through the counter. And so he tried, but the bullets started ricocheting. A couple of them had some of the other co-workers, and they were all desperately trying to find cover. And one of them even ran away from the scene entirely. I knew this was going to be a bad situation because I remember having a conversation with one of the mall cops one time. They weren't allowed to carry guns. So if someone managed to get a gun inside of the mall and started opening fire, we were all going to have to wait for the actual police to show up. I knew the next 15 to 30 minutes was going to determine if I lived or not. I stayed behind the counter for as long as I could. But I heard him coming towards me. My heart pounding in my chest faster than I never felt before. I was mortified, terrified that I was about to die. And for no good reason that some random guy with a gun decides to shoot up a clothing store in a mall. A few minutes have gone by and he hadn't fired another bullet. I wasn't sure if he had been reloading or if he ran out of bullets, or maybe he was saving a few. I had no idea how many he had in a clip. I just remember the sound of footsteps running towards my direction. I knew he was coming my way. And I wasn't sure what I was even capable of doing. At that point, my fight or flight response kicked in, and I figured the best chance I had was waiting for him to get on this other side of the counter where he could see me. And then I was going to have to tackle him. I knew that wasn't the best option. But I'm not sure what the other options I had. For some reason, he jumped over the counter. He landed right next to me, and this was perfect for me. He was close enough that we could get into a scuffle now, and maybe I had a chance of surviving this. I remember grabbing his leg and bring him to the floor. He kicked me in the head. Man, that hurt. almost knocked me out altogether, but I managed to keep going, probably only because of the adrenaline my body was releasing. Once I got him onto the floor, I saw that he had dropped his gun. Considering the fact that he hadn't fired, I figured that he had been out of ammo and too hyped up to reload in the middle of the shooting. We fell on the floor for a good few minutes before someone else decided to join. I don't know why no one else joined sooner. I really could have used the help. It was just me and this deranged psychotic killer fighting on the floor of the small for a good while. It wasn't the strongest guy in the world, but I was also fighting with a bullet wound in my arm. So he had an extreme advantage over me. He probably would have killed me with his bare hands had someone else not joined in and helped me. We managed to knock him unconscious, get the gun further away from him, and waited for the police to arrive. I remember this little experience being the talk of the area for many, many weeks. There were quite a few newspaper articles written about it all. I even got interviewed in one of them. Men, journalists even called me a hero. And to be honest, nothing made me happier or more sadder in the world to read those words. It was just such a traumatic event. The guy was arrested, prosecuted, and I'm pretty sure he got life in prison. People started treating me like a real hero after this. In all honesty, I kind of felt like one. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had not been there to take that guy on. There was no way any of my co-workers would have been able to fight with this guy. And if he had complete control of the situation, he could have taken a hostage or done something much worse. The bullet was removed from my arm. And unfortunately, it did shatter a part of my humerus. I'm still recovering from that. But ever since this experience, I haven't viewed my physical strength as something that makes me cool or better than anyone. I view it as a way that I can protect people. I think this may have been the experience I need to, because I think I might want to become a police officer. After all this is said and done,